من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد خاتم الأنبياء وإمام المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر وتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير وابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. وبعد، ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairun for the invite from Brother Shahid, Dr. Saab, for allowing me to speak on this platform. The topic in hand is about Halloween. On the 31st of October, every year, people get together, they gather, and they start to celebrate this festival. And it is recognized as a national holiday. You could even go far as saying it is an international holiday, because places like America, in Europe, all of these places, they all celebrate Halloween. Now, as Muslims, it is important for us to know when these festivals are happening, especially when a lot of you are probably in school. So when the teachers are mentioning about Halloween and Christmas and Easter and all of these kind of events, what is our stance on it? What are these things? Where are they coming from? What do I, as a Muslim, need to know about this event? What is permissible for me? What is impermissible for me? So inshallah, in the next hour or so, we will speak about the background of Halloween, where it came from, how it is celebrated, why it is it celebrated, and finally we will conclude on how we as Muslims should act around this time of year. So first and foremost, we look at the roots, the origins of Halloween. Approximately 2,000 years ago, there was a group of people who were known as the Celts. Now, for those of you who are in school, I don't know about your syllabus now, but when we were in school, in history, we learnt about the Celts. They were a big group that we used to learn about. It was the Celts, and there was the Anglo-Saxons, and then you learnt about the kings and queens of England. Right? And one of these groups, they were known as the Celts. They lived approximately 2,000 years ago, and they were based around Common Day Island in the UK itself, and then in the north of France. These people were pagans, meaning they worshipped the sun, the moon, trees, etc. They didn't believe in God because they didn't understand about God. They didn't know about Allah. So they just looked at whatever was the biggest and the most powerful thing around them. And this wasn't just with the Celts, but I'm just specializing right now about the Celts. But all across the world, this used to happen. Even in the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Arabia, when you had the Jahiliyyah period, the ignorant period, they would just worship whatever was the most powerful being there. Now, they would either worship the sun, some of them would worship the moon. If they were in the desert, if you saw a really big rock, they would worship this rock. Some of them who were out on the sea, they would worship the sea. All of these kind of things. They would worship trees. And these individuals, for them, they were farmers. So it was important for them was the harvest. So when is it the most lightest? When is it the darkest? And how is this going to impact their growing of their crops? Because this was their support of life. You know, they didn't have Deliveroo and Just Eat. They couldn't just ring somebody up and say, you know, come and drop me a pizza off. For them, they had to grow everything themselves. Now, on November the 1st, that was what they called their New Year's Day. Now, for us, our New Year's Day, for Muslims, is the 1st of Muharram. For the Gregorian calendar, it is the 1st of January. For them, it was the 1st of November. The 1st of November for them, the reason it was New Year's Day was because this was the beginning of the new dark period of the year. So this is the time where the days became shorter, the nights became longer, and it was the entrance of the cold. The winter would begin to come upon them. And a lot of people around this time, they would die from the cold, because obviously there was no heat in there. There was no central heating, etc., like we have now. So a lot of people would die from disease, from cold, and from lack of food. So all of these things were happening. So the 1st of November was the day that they put all of this together. Now the night before was called, on October 31st, they called this, now many people pronounce this Samhain, but it's actually called Sarwin. Now the day of Sarwin, what was this? The day of Sarwin was the night before this day of the harvest, of the 1st of November. And what they would do in Sarwin is they would light big bonfires. They would light big bonfires, they would gather around the bonfires and they would tell stories, they would dance, they would to scare each other, they would tell stories of their deceased. All of these kind of things, they would take place around that night. Now, what they would believe is that on the 31st of October, so what you would call their New Year's Eve, what they would believe is that a portal would open. A portal would open between the afterlife and this life. So the barrier between life and death, it would become blurred. So they would say that the dead would walk among them. So they would say it was possible for the dead to come over onto the living side, and it was possible for the living to go over onto the dead side. So what they would do is they would believe in ghosts. And they will say that these ghosts, they are wandering amongst us. So what they would do is, out of fear of these ghosts, they would wear masks and they will wear costumes. And they would say, if we wear these masks and if we wear these costumes, then what will happen is these ghosts, they will not be able to recognize us and we will be safe. This was the practice of the Celtics approximately 2,000 years ago. Now the night before, on the 31st, on the night of Samhain, what they would do is, it would be a sort of a mischief night. So the children and some of the poor people, they would go around and they would damage crops, they would cause vandalism, they would cause trouble. And another practice that they would have is, they would go over to the Druids. Now the Druids, who were they? The Druids were these pagan priests. And some of them were philosophers, some of them were politicians, etc. All of them, these were their higher up people, and they would go to them. Now when they would go to them, now these people, they were a very superstitious people, so they would go over to these Druids and they would say to them, please tell us about the future. Tell us what is going to happen in the following year, because we are interested. We need to know. So now these people, they will take their hands and they will start reading their palms. They will start doing all this weird hocus pocus stuff. And what they would also do is they will start telling them what would happen in the coming year. And these poor people who were worried about their lives, they were, really insecure. They would become so caught up in this, they would start to believe these people. Now, they would light this really big bonfire. And everybody in the town, they would get together and they would wear costumes. And the costumes that they would use is the fur of animals. They would put those on their back. And then the head of the animal, the skin, they would put that over their heads. So it would just you can just imagine the sight. These people just dressed as animals, wearing these costumes. And there's some really big bonfire which is being lit. And then what they would do was they would do sacrifices. So they will sacrifice animals and they will sacrifice crops. So their crops were really important to them and their animals were really important to them. So they will sacrifice them to their, quote unquote, to their gods. To say that, look, we are sacrificing that which is important to us. Now you protect our lives. You preserve the lives of our loved ones. And then through this sacrifice, keep us alive throughout this dark period. Then what they would do is, they did not have fireplaces like us. They couldn't press a button and light, the fire would be lit. They would have to light the fire themselves. So now, the night before, when they light this big bonfire, they would say, this is a very holy fire for us. Now we're going to take this fire, the ashes from this fire, we're going to take it into our home, and we are going to place it in our fireplaces, the fire area that they like to keep warm. They would place it in there, and then they would light fires. And in their minds, they would think this would protect them throughout the winter. Another practice that they had was, because it was so cold, a lot of them would not take a bath. They would not bathe for X amount of months. Maybe 3 or 4 months, they would not take a bath. Because they were worried. Because obviously they didn't have showers. They couldn't go and stand underneath the shower, use their shower gels and come out fresh. What they would have to do is, they would have to go out into the lakes. And they would go into the lakes, and then they would use that water to clean themselves. So based upon this, because it was so cold, and for the risk of pneumonia and other diseases like this from bathing in the cold, they would refrain from bathing. So they would stay in a state of impurity for all of these amounts of months. Another practice that they had was, they looked around, and maybe in the future, if we have a chance to speak about Christmas, then we'll go into more detail about this. But another practice that they saw was, they looked around and they saw every single thing around them is dying. All the plants, all the crops, all the trees, all the leaves, all the bushes, everything is dying. They are just left with twigs and branches. There's nothing else left. So now they come to the realization that, wait, there is one tree. There is one tree which seems to be staying fresh and green throughout the entire year. And what tree was that? It was the fir tree, the evergreen tree. What people make Christmas trees out from in this day and age. So what they would do is, they would take these trees down, they would chop them down, and they would drag them into their homes. And they would place these trees inside their homes, and then they will cut out pieces of the tree, and they would create wreaths, like these round wreaths made from the tree, place them outside their homes, outside the windows, and they will place mistletoe all around their homes. And they would say, this tree is going to protect us throughout the winter, because this tree has special powers. This is why this tree is staying alive, and because of these special powers, it is going to be transferred into our home, and it will keep us alive as well. So they will place this tree in their home, and then they will take a light, like a candle or something, and they will place it at the top of the tree. Because these were the two most important things to them. You had the evergreen tree, and then you had the light. So these were the two things that they had. And if you look at it in this day and age, what does it correspond to? It corresponds to the Christmas tree and placing a star on top of the Christmas tree. So that is where this comes from. Now, this was the background of the Sarwin, or as some people say, Samhain. So this is the background of it. This is why these individuals would practice this day. This is why it was so important to them. So now, how does this become Halloween? How does this day come to us and in this land? And how does it go to places like in Europe? And how does it go to America and all of these places? I mean, I've seen disturbing videos over the past now where it's reaching Muslim lands. There's quote unquote Halloween parties happening in Riyadh and Jeddah. This is the land of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's even reaching there. So how is it reaching there? In 43 AD, the Romans entered the picture. The Romans, they conquered the Celts. They conquered the Celts, and they rule over the Celts for approximately 400 years. Now what they see is, now these people, they thought they are smart, and they thought that, look, we will not introduce our festivals. We will not introduce our religious festivals. These guys, they already have their religious festivals. So what we will do is, we will combine them. Because if we combine them, then these people, they will not revolt against us. So the Romans, they had two main festivals. The first festival was known as Feralia. And this festival of Feralia, they used it to commemorate the dead people. So those people who had passed away, they used it as a day to remember them, and they would speak about them, and they will honor them, say prayers for them, etc. The second day that they had, and when I say festival, you could probably say is equivalent to a day of Eid for them, or a day of Christmas for them. This is what they were using it for. It was a day of celebration. Now they had a goddess. They would believe in this woman, and they said that she is a goddess. And this goddess, they said her name is Pomona. And she was the goddess of fruit and trees. And her sign was the apple. Now, we don't have this in this country, but if you look in America, they have this tradition. And this tradition, they call it, it's a little game, they call it bobbing for apples. And what it basically is you have this really big bucket. I don't know, so some people are smiling, so maybe you guys know about it as well. So it's a bucket. They fill it with water, and then they put apples in it. And then what you do is, you have another bucket next to it, and you race each other. And then the first person who can put their head into the water and take an apple out just with their mouth, not using their hands, they are the winner. Now the historians say that this tradition, it came about from the goddess Pomona. That this is where it originated from, because her sign was the apple. So the Romans, when they look at these two festivals and they look at the festivals of the Celts, they combine Sarwin with these two festivals. Now, the Christians now, they had another festival. This festival took place on May the 13th, 609 AD. Now, Pope Boniface IV, he dedicated the Pantheon in Rome to all of the Christians who had the martyrs on that day. And he called this All Martyrs' Day. So they would honor those people who had been martyred for them in battle. Pope Gregory III, he comes about now, and he expands this festival of All Saints' Day. He says this festival, it needs to be expanded, it needs to be bigger, it needs to be better, we need more people to be involved. So what he does now is, he moves the festival from May the 13th to November the 1st, which corresponds to the New Year's Day of the Celts. So now the Celts are involved. So both festivals now are combined. The Celts and the Christians, they join together a lot of their practices. A lot of the things that they were doing, they start to join them together. And the Christians, the reason they are doing this is because they do not want a revolt from the Celtic people. They want to just involve them so they are together and they are integrated and they can do things together. In 1000 AD, November the 2nd, the Christian church, they changed this into All Souls Day. Now this All Souls Day is to remember every single soul that has passed away up until that point. So All Martyrs' Day was on November the 1st, and All Souls' Day was set on November the 2nd. And this was an attempt, the historians mention, this was an attempt by the Christians to replace the festival of Samhain. All Saints' Day later they begin to call it All Hallows or Hallowmas, and the night before it, they start to call it All Hallows Eve, and then after time, it turns into Halloween. So that is where it came from, and that is where the Christians and the Romans, they bring it all together. And this is how it reaches us now. Now, there are certain practices which we need to look at now in Halloween that have occurred, and we need to know where they came from. The first one is trick or treat. Now, many youngsters on this day, they get together on October 31st on the night, on All Hallows Eve or Halloween, and they go out trick or treating. And they think it's fun. They dress up like little princesses or little devils or little angels or the boogeyman or all of these kind of things. They dress up and they go out trick or treating, knocking on people's doors. and saying, trick or treat. And then they receive a treat, right? And if you go to a horrible person's house and they will give you a trick, throw some slime out the window or throw buckets of water over you or something, right? But these kind of things exist. Now, in the early All Souls Day parades, what would happen is individuals would dress up in costumes and they will go around the streets and they will parade around the streets. And this was a specific parade for Halloween. Now, the trick or treat, it started with the poor people. Now, this is very important. It started with the poor people. The poor people were hungry. They did not have food. They did not have money. It was a cold period and they needed a source of income or some kind of generosity to survive. So what they would do is they would go around and they would knock on people's doors and they would beg for food. They would beg for food and for money. So what they would do is, because the people around that time, they believed that on this day, their ghosts of their family members, their loved members, they will all come out. They would all come out and they needed somebody to pray for them. So these poor people, they would come and they would beg for money and for food. And they would say, if you give us money and food, we will then pray for your dead ones. And the people would say, yes, okay, we agree. And then they would give them these pastries which were called soul cakes. And this was a treat for them. Soul cakes, they replaced the act that was taking place before it. What was the act before it? These people, what they would believe is their loved ones, their ghosts would come back on this night and they needed to prepare things for them. So what they would do is they will set out a table and they will set out plates of food for the dead ones. And some of them, what they would do is they were scared of the ghosts and the spirits. So what they would do is they would leave wine and they would leave food outside their doors and say that through this, the spirits would take this food and they would leave them alone. And then what they would do is they would light a candle. They would light candles away from their homes and away from the village, and they would say these candles will guide the spirits back to the other realm. So this was all happening, and this is where trick-or-treating comes from. Originally, it was being done by adults. Then this act of going a-souling. So now it's called trick-or-treat. Before it was called going a-souling. Then the adults stopped doing it and they started to send their children to do it. So now children started to knock on people's doors and they were given food or money or they were given ale and they would be given alcohol. And this is alcohol being given to little children. All of this was taking place. Now, the second practice is of wearing costumes. Now, as I mentioned before, the Celtic people, they were worried about ghosts. They would think that these ghosts are coming back, these spirits are coming back from the dead, and some of them believe that they will cause harm to them. And they will say that we do not want to be attacked by these spirits, so they would start to wear masks, and they will say, because we have these masks, then people, these spirits, they will not be able to recognize us. And this will be like a protection against the ghosts. So they were wearing this like a tawiz, an amulet. It was like a protection for them. Now, what happens next is what we need to discuss. So these were the two practices that I wanted to discuss. Now, the major question now is, the practice of Halloween has become so widespread. It's become mainstream. It's literally everywhere. How has it become so big? How has it expanded all across the world? In the pre-19th century, all of these practices were happening mostly in the UK, the north of France, and then in Ireland. In the second half of the 19th century, there was a famine. It's called the Irish potato famine. It happened in Ireland. Now what happened here is millions of Irish people, they migrated from Ireland and they went to America. Now this is where Halloween erupts to the actual size of how it is today. And a lot of the practices now come because of it being introduced in America. Now, when the Irish, they came over to America, they started to bring these practices out. Every night on October the 31st, the poor children and the youngsters, they would go out and they would cause absolute havoc amongst the streets. Now, this wasn't just playing little tricks, etc. They would go and they would literally vandalize the whole areas. One of the tricks that they had was they would go to the farms and they would open the gates and let all the cows and the cattle, etc., they would let them escape from the fields. This is a trick that they used to play on the farmers. Another trick that they used to play was they used to have chariots, like little carts, and these carts would be pulled by horses. So it's kind of like a car now in this day and age. So what they would do is, as a joke, they would completely dismantle this cart and then they would climb onto the roof of people's homes and then they would reassemble the cart on top of the home. So these people would wake up in the morning and they would find their carts on top of their homes. So it's like you go to sleep, you've parked your car on your driveway, you wake up in the morning and you find your nice BMW or whatever you're driving on top of your roof. So these are the type of things that they used to do. Then, over the years, it became worse. It became even worse. These youngsters, they started to become more aggressive and more violent. So there was a lot of abuse happening. There was a lot of vandalism happening. Fires were being set. Properties were being vandalized. All of this was happening, right? Now, I just want to draw your attention to one major point, that everything I am telling you here, it is not from an Islamic source. It is from historians, and it is from UK history, and it is from American history. So whatever I am telling you, nobody can turn around and say that, oh no, the Muslims are making it up. That's not where it's coming from. It is actually coming from reliable sources, from their own people. And it's simple for you. You can just go onto YouTube or Google and you can search for many articles on the origins of Halloween, and all of this information I'm giving to you, it will all be at your fingertips. So these individuals now, they start to cause all of this havoc and all of this trouble. Now the people, the mayors of the cities, they all become worried and they think, we need to put a stop to this. So what they start to do is, the big parties that they were throwing on on Halloween, on the 31st, they started to restrict them. They started to bring them to schools and closed halls and homes, so they could restrict all of the abuse that were happening. The companies, big toy companies, they started to come out and they started to produce costumes for people. The first costumes that they started to produce were made from paper, but then they started to shift away from paper because their costumes kept catching fire. So now they started to develop all these new costumes and it started to become mainstream. All of these companies, they started to compete with each other to produce the best costume. And then what they would do is, one company, it released an activities book to take people away from causing vandalism on the streets, to control everything that they were doing. So they would give them ideas for parties, give them ideas for little activities to keep the children entertained, to prevent them from causing any more harm on the streets. So this is what happened now. So they introduced fancy dress competitions, these acts of bobbing for apples, and all of these kind of things, trick-or-treating. All of this started to happen. Now, because of all of these companies becoming involved, and obviously when you have a company, you have to promote what you are doing in order for your product to sell. So there was a lot of advertisement, and this is how Halloween became famous. Then you had people coming in and telling their stories about witches, right? And witches, they weren't really a thing. Witches were just women who used to live secluded in their own area. And what they would do is they would look at them and they would say, these are witches. Because they used to have herbal healing remedies. And when they would use these herbal healing remedies, they would say, no, they're witches. So then they started to use the witches. And the witches at the time, especially in areas like Maryland and Salem in America, they had little hats. They would wear these hats and they used that as a symbol for witches. Then they looked at other things in the kitchen. Now, a cooking pot that they had, an instrument they had, was a giant cauldron. So they linked that to witches now, and they said, no, they use that to mix potions. And now this cauldron would often be in the kitchen next to what? A broomstick. The broomstick used to be used to sweep the floors. They would say, no, this broomstick is a apparatus for them to ride upon. And then because these women used to live on their own, they used to have cats as companions. So now they symbolize cats as being their companions, and cats are known to be evil for them as well now. So this is where witches came from. This is where cauldrons came from. This is where broomsticks come from. This is where evil cats come from. This is where ghosts come from. All of this happens. And another practice that they have is they started to carve out, initially it was, off the top of my head, I lose my mind at the moment, I think it was a beetroot. They had beetroot and they would use beetroot and they would carve faces in it to cause protection for them from ghosts. Then over time, that changed from beetroot to something more, more fun. And this thing was what? A pumpkin. So then they would, and these beetroots initially, they would use it as a jack-o'-lantern. They would use it as a protection because there was a myth to say that there was a boy and his name was Jack. And Jack was so evil, Jack was so bad that even the devil kicked him out of the hellfire and said to him, you're too evil even for hell. And now on every night of October 31st, Jack wanders the streets and you need to protect yourselves from him. So they had these beetroots, and these beetroots they would use to walk around and put them outside their homes to protect them, right? And then eventually it turns to pumpkins. So this is why they carve out faces in pumpkins. So this is just a brief overview of everything that took place with regards to Halloween. And now obviously because of TV, because of radio, magazines, and all of these kind of things, Halloween has just taken off even bigger. This is why it has spread all across the globe, because of all of these movies like Halloween and Jason and Freddy Krueger and all of these kind of things. All is linked to Halloween, and then Halloween, because of this, it becomes mainstream and it becomes famous, and this is the origins of where it came from. So this was the background of Halloween. Now, in summing up, what does Islam have to say about Halloween? Number one, first and foremost, we turn to the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Ma'idah, He says, today I have completed for you your religion. Right? I'm just putting it into layman's terms. This isn't the actual translation. Right? I don't want people attacking me. Right? I'm giving you the meaning of it. So today is the day I have completed your religion for you, and I have completed my favor upon you, and I have chosen Islam as the religion for you. Now, Islam is the religion which has been chosen for you. So if Islam is a religion which has been chosen for you, then we do not turn to other religions and use their practices for us. Because Muslims stick to their own festivals. And what are the Muslim festivals? We have the Eids. We have 2 Eids, and we celebrate that. We have even the day of the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, which people call Eid as well. Right? So we have 3 days. Right? All of these days we celebrate. We do not need to look towards the pagan traditions or Christian traditions or other traditions to celebrate. We don't need to be taking part in festivals like Diwali or Vaisakhi. I don't want to be seeing Muslims going for a Vaisakhi march. You know, I've got Sikh friends. You know, I'm not saying that we attack non-Muslims. I'm not saying we don't treat them with respect. But what I'm saying is, leave them to their religion. We have our religion. And Allah is saying now that our religion is complete. We don't need an addition of anything else. Like I mentioned, I have many Sikh friends. You will not see me on a Vaisakhi march, and you will not see them in the masjid, praying Eid Salah. You just wouldn't see it. Right? So that's the first evidence that we have, and that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. Number two, we take the hadith from the Sahihain, which is found in the Sahih collection of Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, from Sayyidina Abu Sa'id al-Khadri radiyallahu an. He mentions that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that you will follow them handspan by handspan and cubit by cubit, even until if they ran and they just encompass themselves and put themselves into the lizard hole, or in one narration it mentions the snake's hole. If you went into there, they went into there, you would follow them right behind. The Sahaba asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Jews and the Christians, do you mean the Jews and the Christians? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, who else? So that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what was he saying here? He was saying that no matter what the Jews and the Christians do, you will follow them. Even if they go into the ground where the lizard goes into, right? Because that's something obscene. If you've seen a hole in the ground, brother, if you've seen a hole in the ground, you just wouldn't do it, right? And this is why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is using this example, because logically you just would not do it. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us here, and he's warning us that even if they did something illogical, that you will follow. So here the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, do not follow them in every single thing that they do. Just do not follow them. And the ulama said that this is not just to Jews and Christians. This extends to other faiths as well. In another hadith, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Sunnah of Abu Dawood, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever imitates a people is one of them. That if you try to be like somebody, then you are amongst them. And in another hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, you will be with those whom you love. And this is very important, especially with our youngsters here. I mean, if you want to go to the barbers and you want to get a fade, you want to get a 0 on the side and it's number 2 on the top, or you want to do this, you want to wear your hoodies, you want to wear your TN, your Air Max 97s, you want to do all of this stuff, do it, right? There's no harm in that. Where is the harm? The harm is where you turn the TV on. And now I'm not in tune with the latest, the hip hop guys. So I don't know, I'm going to probably go a bit old schooler. If you see someone like Drake, or you see someone like Bugsy Malone, or these people on TV, and you say, oh, that haircut looks really good. I want to get that haircut. Because now what you're doing is you're imitating the kuffar. You're imitating the non-Muslims. If you want to imitate anybody, you imitate the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the best of creation. There is none like him. And if you want to be successful in this world and the next, use him as a model. Right? So we say, وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us and preserve us, protect our children, and prevent them from following the non-Muslims. And we open up to any questions, if there are any questions. Bismillah, very good question. So brother wants to know, how are you committing shirk if you do not have the intention of the mass protecting you against the dead? Because the practice itself is from another religion. They are using the practice as a basis for protection from the dead. It's coming from their pagan belief. So just by you taking that upon you, right, you are taking part in that belief. It's like if you take a Christmas tree now into your home, you start decorating it, and you say, I've got nothing to do with the Christmas. I don't believe this tree's got magic powers. But the fact of the matter is, you are still using a practice which is done by non-Muslims according to their belief. So this itself is shirk. Because you are associating things with from another religion to yourself, and that is something which is haram. They are committing a sin because ignorance isn't something which removes a sin. So here, this is where you guys come in. You know, all of your mates who are not here today, is your job to go and tell them. Do you understand? Right? That is the whole purpose. And my students, I tell them all the time, you're coming to my classes. The reason you're coming to my classes is not for entertainment. You're not coming to just sit here and go away. You come here to learn, and then you go and you warn other Muslims. You teach other Muslims. Yeah? So just whatever you learnt today, just make sure you tell your friends and your family. And it's not, you go and you start arguing with them. And if somebody's like, you know, going out to do trick-or-treating or something, you put them in a headlock, you know, that's not what it means, right? It's just you tell them, you say, look, this is not from Islam. This is something which is wrong, you shouldn't be doing it. And then if they listen to you, then alhamdulillah. If they don't listen to you, then try again another time. Yeah? But just be very careful with your approach. With that one, you're going to get two views. You're going to get two views. You're going to get some people who are just completely straight, they're going to say, no, just leave it completely altogether, right? But my answer to that would be, the historians, they said it might come from that. Yeah? Like they said it might come from the goddess Pomona because the apple is a symbol of her sign, right? But they weren't sure. So if you're doing it at another time, say for example, you're doing it for sports day or fun day at school, then I don't see an issue with it. But anything else, which is actually, you know, just set directly from other religions, then it doesn't matter what time of year you do it, it will still be wrong. Right? So if you decide to, you know, put up a Christmas tree with an angel on top and start decorating it in the middle of August, right, it will still be haram.
But what if you don't have that intention? Like, it's nothing
intention's got nothing to do with it, brother. That's like saying, you know, I'm going to drink alcohol, but I haven't got the intention of being drunk. Right?
Yeah, but if a tree is different, because what if you're just trying to decorate your home with something little, like a tree? And it's not
but we're talking about Christmas trees here. Our mothers, especially like the ones who are elder here, you know, they always used to put trees in the home, right? It was just like a decorative item. But we're talking about like actual Christmas trees, like that's what we're talking about here.